Keep your hands where I can see them." The command struck the rain-soaked bridge harder than the wind, and Colonel Evelyn Carter froze with both palms already resting on the steering wheel. Red and blue lights pulsed across her windshield, turning every drop of water into a trembling shard of color. She had followed every instruction. Window down. Engine off. Interior light on. No sudden movements. Still, the white officer standing beside her door watched her as though calm itself were suspicious. Evelyn kept her voice steady. "My license is in my wallet, inside my coat. Left side." Officer Daniel Brooks leaned closer, rain sliding from the brim of his hat. His flashlight swept across the passenger seat, the unopened bottle of water in the cup holder, and the folded garment bag hanging behind her. He never asked what was inside it. He never noticed the silver eagle insignia tucked beneath the clear plastic. Behind him, a younger officer named Ryan Miller stood near the patrol car, one hand pressed against his radio, his expression uncertain. Something about the stop felt wrong, though he could not yet name it. There had been no speeding. No reckless turn. Only a report of a dark sedan with a damaged rear plate light, and Evelyn's car happened to match. "Step out of the vehicle," Brooks ordered. Evelyn glanced at him, then at the camera attached to his chest. Its small red light blinked steadily. Recording. Remembering. "Officer, I'm willing to comply," she said. "But you just told me not to move my hands." Brooks's jaw tightened. "Don't argue with me." The rain drummed against the roof in quick, nervous beats. Evelyn had heard that tone before in war rooms, during emergency landings, and across long nights when one wrong decision could cost lives. She knew what fear sounded like when it dressed itself as authority. She also knew that challenging it too quickly could make it worse. So she breathed in through her nose, slow and measured, counting the way she had taught young soldiers to count when panic narrowed the world. 1, 2, 3. "I'm going to reach for the door handle with my right hand," she said clearly. "Then I will step out." Miller's eyes shifted. Toward Brooks. For one brief second, he seemed ready to speak. He didn't. Evelyn opened the door and stepped into the cold rain. She wore dark slacks, a charcoal coat, and low black shoes polished that morning for a ceremony she had waited months to attend. Her son, Marcus, was taking his military oath at sunrise. In the back seat, beneath the garment bag, rested a small wooden box containing the brass compass her father had carried through Vietnam. She had planned to give it to Marcus after the ceremony. Now the bridge felt strangely far from everything that mattered. Brooks told her to turn around. She obeyed. He asked for identification. She reminded him where it was. Then he ordered her to retrieve it. Evelyn slowly moved one hand toward her coat, exactly as instructed. Miller saw the confusion before it became consequence. He saw her open palm. He saw the edge of a leather wallet. He saw no threat at all. A sudden sound cut through the rain, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn fell against the side of the car, then sank to the wet pavement, her eyes still open, fixed on the blinking red light of Brooks's body camera. Her wallet slipped free and landed inches from Miller's boots. A military identification card slid across the white lane marker and stopped beneath the glow of his flashlight. Miller bent down, picked it up, and stared at the name, the photograph, and the rank printed beneath them. Colonel Evelyn Carter. United States Army. His face lost all color. On the ground, Evelyn drew one careful breath and looked past Brooks toward the young officer holding her card. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the rain. "Your camera saw everything." 6 hours earlier, Evelyn Carter had stepped from a military transport plane into the damp Virginia night carrying one small suitcase and a promise she had made to her son. She would be there when Marcus raised his right hand at sunrise. No delayed briefing, no emergency call, and no senior officer asking for one final favor would keep her away this time. The runway lights glowed through a veil of mist as she crossed the tarmac in plain clothes, her charcoal coat buttoned against the wind. Inside her suitcase, folded with precise corners, rested the dark blue uniform she had worn through promotions, memorials, and homecomings. The silver eagles on its shoulders had taken 27 years to earn, but tonight she wanted no ceremony for herself. Tonight belonged to Marcus. At the terminal, a young soldier offered to carry her bag. Evelyn thanked him and declined with a quiet smile. She had learned long ago that kindness mattered most when no one was required to give it. Outside, she found the aging black sedan her brother had left in long-term parking. The paint had faded around the trunk, and the rear plate light flickered when she started the engine, but the car still smelled faintly of cedar and peppermint, just as it had when their father drove it. Evelyn sat behind the wheel for a moment, listening to the soft hum of the heater. On the passenger seat lay a handwritten note from Marcus. "Save me a seat in the front row, Mom." She read it twice before tucking it carefully into the glove compartment. Her telephone showed 3 missed calls from the base and 1 message from Brigadier General Thomas Reed asking whether she had reconsidered staying for the morning command briefing. Evelyn typed a simple reply. "My son has waited long enough." Then she placed the telephone face down. The highway stretched nearly 40 miles toward Richmond, shining black beneath the rain. Evelyn drove beneath the speed limit, both hands steady on the wheel. Years of command had trained her to notice small things: a truck drifting toward the shoulder, water gathering near an exit ramp, headlights approaching too quickly from behind. Discipline had carried her through rooms where men mistook silence for uncertainty and patience for weakness. She had never needed to announce who she was before making herself heard. At a gas station halfway to the city, she bought coffee and called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. "You landed," he said, trying and failing to hide his relief. "I told you I would." "Are you wearing the uniform tomorrow?" Evelyn looked through the rain at the garment bag hanging behind her. "Only because you asked nicely." Marcus laughed, and for a moment she was not a colonel responsible for hundreds of lives. She was simply a mother listening to the child she had once carried through thunderstorms. After they hung up, she opened the wooden box beside her suitcase and touched the brass compass inside. Her father had carried it across Vietnam and later given it to her before her first deployment. "A good leader does not tell people where to stand," he had said. "A good leader makes sure no one is left behind." Evelyn closed the box and returned to the road. 10 miles later, red and blue lights appeared in her mirror. She checked her speed, signaled, and pulled onto the bridge shoulder. She had no reason to be afraid. That certainty would last only a few more minutes. Officer Daniel Brooks had been driving the night shift for nearly 14 years, long enough to believe that instinct mattered more than hesitation. He sat behind the wheel of the patrol car with one hand resting near the radio and the other drumming against the steering wheel as rain slid across the windshield. Beside him, Officer Ryan Miller reviewed the traffic report on the dashboard screen. 24 years old, 6 months out of the academy, Miller still carried a notebook in his vest pocket and wrote down nearly everything Brooks said. Brooks noticed. He liked being listened to. Earlier that evening, they had stopped beneath the awning of a closed grocery store while the storm moved over the county. Brooks had watched passing headlights and told Miller that the road rewarded certainty. "Do not wait for danger to prove itself," he said. "By then, it may be too late." Miller had nodded, but the sentence stayed with him in the wrong way. At the academy, instructors had taught him to slow a scene down, give clear commands, and avoid forcing a person into contradictory choices. Brooks spoke as though patience belonged to people who had never been tested. He had the confidence of a man who had been praised for making fast decisions and rarely questioned afterward. Several years earlier, a supervisor had called him aggressive during a routine review. Brooks had laughed and said aggression was simply courage viewed from a safe office. The comment became a joke around the station. No one challenged it. Near midnight, the dispatcher mentioned a dark sedan with a damaged rear plate light traveling east toward Richmond. The violation was minor, but Brooks immediately accelerated. Miller looked up from the screen. "That is all we have?" he asked. Brooks glanced at him. "That is enough to make contact." The patrol car moved through the rain, tires hissing across the wet pavement. Within minutes, they spotted Evelyn's sedan ahead of them. She was traveling below the speed limit and holding her lane. Brooks followed for nearly a mile before activating the lights. Miller watched the sedan signal immediately and pull onto the widest section of the bridge shoulder. "Safe stop," he said quietly. Brooks did not answer. He studied the rear window, the shape of the driver, and the garment bag hanging behind the front seat. Then he reached for the radio and reported that the vehicle matched the description. Miller checked the original call again. There had been no report of a crime, no stolen vehicle notice, and no warning about a weapon. Only a plate light that occasionally went dark. He opened his mouth to mention it, but Brooks was already outside. The wind caught the patrol door and pushed cold rain into the cabin. Miller stepped out and followed, keeping several feet behind his training officer. From that distance, he could see Evelyn turn on the interior light before Brooks reached her window. Both of her hands were visible on the steering wheel. She did everything they had been taught to ask for. Brooks still approached with his flashlight high and his shoulders rigid. The first question was not whether she knew the light was damaged. It was where she had been and what she was doing on that road so late. Evelyn answered calmly, explaining that she was traveling home from a military airfield. Brooks looked at her charcoal coat and the old sedan, then asked for proof. Miller heard something in his tone that was not caution. It was disbelief. Evelyn said her identification was inside her coat. Brooks told her not to move. A moment later, he demanded that she retrieve it. Miller felt the contradiction immediately. The rain beat against his hat, and the bridge lights blurred at the edges of his vision. He could have stepped forward. He could have clarified the command. He could have said that her hands had never left the wheel. Instead, he remained beside the patrol car, caught between what he had seen and the authority of the men standing ahead of him. Brooks glanced back once, and Miller understood the silent expectation. Support me. Do not question me. The red light on Brooks's body camera continued blinking as Evelyn carefully asked which instruction she was supposed to follow. Brooks's face hardened. Miller looked at her steady hands, then at his training officer, and realized the stop was no longer about a broken light. It had become a test of whose fear would be treated as truth, and whose calm would be treated as guilt. Evelyn kept her hands visible and studied Brooks through the rain. The name on his badge caught the light for half a second, and something old stirred in her memory. Daniel Brooks. 3 years earlier, she had stood beneath fluorescent lights inside a county training center and spoken to a room filled with police officers, military personnel, and emergency supervisors. Brooks had been there, seated in the back row with his arms folded and his expression already decided. The course was called Decision-Making Under Pressure, but Evelyn had spent most of that morning teaching something harder than procedure. She taught people how fear could disguise itself as certainty. She taught them that a uniform did not make instinct infallible. She taught them that the person in front of them might know more than they assumed. Brooks had raised his hand near the end and asked whether hesitation could get an officer killed. Evelyn remembered her answer exactly. Unchecked certainty can harm an innocent person before the truth has time to speak. He had looked away before she finished. Now, standing beside her sedan on a dark Virginia bridge, he showed no sign that he recognized her. Without the uniform, without the insignia, without a room waiting for her to speak, she was simply a black woman in an old car who had asked him to clarify his own command. Evelyn understood the danger in correcting a man who believed authority meant never being questioned. She also understood that fear spread fastest when no one interrupted it. Her voice remained calm. Officer Brooks, I want to follow your instructions correctly. You told me not to move, and you also told me to retrieve my identification. Please tell me which action you want first. Brooks shifted his flashlight higher, the beam washing across her face. Do what I told you, he said. Which instruction? She asked. The question was respectful, but it exposed the contradiction too clearly. Miller took one step forward. Sir, her hands are visible, he said. Brooks turned his head slightly. Stay in position. Miller stopped. Evelyn saw the younger officer swallow. He was frightened, not of her, but of disagreeing with the men training him. That fear was quieter, but it was still shaping the moment. Evelyn had seen young soldiers freeze beneath the weight of rank, even when their instincts warned them something was wrong. She had taught them that obedience without judgment was not discipline. It was surrender. Her eyes moved to Miller. Officer, I am going to reach slowly with my left hand. My wallet is inside the coat pocket. There is nothing else there. Miller nodded before he seemed to realize he had done it. Brooks noticed. His jaw tightened. I did not give you permission to speak to him, he said. Evelyn felt the cold rain slip beneath her collar. The bridge wind pushed against her coat, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and river water. She could hear traffic passing in the far lane, each vehicle slowing briefly before moving on. Strangers saw flashing lights and assumed the situation was under control. That assumption created its own kind of silence. Brooks ordered her to face the car. Evelyn complied, placing both palms against the damp metal. The garment bag in the back seat swayed gently each time the wind struck the vehicle. Through the rear window, she could see the outline of her dress uniform and the wooden box meant for Marcus. Sunrise was less than 5 hours away. Somewhere in Richmond, her son was probably asleep, trusting that she would keep her promise. Brooks asked again where she had come from. A military airfield, she answered. What kind of work do you do there? Evelyn paused. She could have given him her rank. She could have named the base, the command, and the officers who would answer her call. But respect that appeared only after a title was revealed was not respect. It was calculation. I serve this country, she said. Brooks gave a short, humorless laugh. A lot of people say that. Evelyn turned her head just enough to see the red light on his camera. Then let the record show that I cooperated, she said. The words changed something in Miller's face. Brooks heard it too. For the first time, his confidence seemed less like strength and more like a door he was struggling to keep closed. Brooks stepped closer, rain shining on the shoulders of his uniform. The blinking camera light remained between them like a silent witness. Evelyn kept both palms against the car and waited for a clear instruction. Instead, Brooks told her to retrieve the wallet, then immediately warned her not to move too quickly. The contradiction tightened the air. Miller heard it. Evelyn heard it. Even Brooks seemed to hear it, but pride had already taken control of the moment. Evelyn turned her head slightly. Officer Brooks, I am going to move my left hand toward my coat, exactly as you ordered. Her voice was measured, each word placed carefully enough for the camera to record. Brooks did not answer. Evelyn began the movement slowly. Miller could see every inch of it. Her fingers remained open. Her shoulder stayed relaxed. The leather edge of the wallet appeared beneath the coat. Nothing about her posture suggested resistance. Still, Brooks reacted as if certainty mattered more than what stood in front of him. A sharp sound broke through the rain. The bridge seemed to go still. Evelyn lost her balance against the sedan and lowered to the pavement, one hand pressing against the wet ground for support. Her wallet slipped from her fingers. Miller moved before Brooks could speak. He reached her side, his training taking over where courage had failed him moments earlier. Stay with me, ma'am, he said, his voice unsteady. Evelyn looked at him, not with panic, but with a disciplined focus that made his own breathing slow. Call medical support, she said. Then preserve the recording. Brooks stared down at her, shock passing across his face before something colder replaced it. He reached for his radio. Suspect made a threatening movement, he reported. Possible concealed weapon. Miller looked up sharply. There was no weapon, he said. Brooks turned toward him. You saw her reach inside her coat. I saw her follow your order. The words escaped Miller before fear could stop them. For a second, neither man moved. Rainwater streamed from the patrol lights and ran across the white lane marker in thin red and blue ribbons. Brooks lowered his voice. Officer Miller, you will confirm the subject ignored commands and reached suddenly. Miller looked at Evelyn's open wallet beside his knee. A driver's license rested inside. Beneath it was a military identification card. He pulled it free, and the beam of his flashlight passed over the photograph, the name, and the rank. Colonel Evelyn Carter. United States Army. Miller's stomach dropped. Brooks saw the card and went silent. Evelyn watched both men closely. She recognized the exact moment when they stopped seeing her as an unknown woman on the side of the road and began seeing the consequences attached to her name. That realization did not comfort her. It made the injustice clearer. She should not have needed a rank to become believable. She should not have needed silver eagles to become human in their eyes. In the distance, sirens began to approach. Brooks crouched beside Miller, his voice barely above the rain. We need to get the report straight before everyone arrives. Miller stared at him. Straight, or changed? Brooks's face hardened. You are new. You do not understand how fast these situations happen. I understand what I saw, Miller said. Brooks glanced at the body camera, then at Evelyn. For the first time, he seemed afraid of the same recording he had trusted to protect him. He reached toward the camera as though checking whether it was still active. Evelyn's voice stopped him. Do not touch it. Brooks froze. There was no anger in her tone, only command. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed during moments when confusion could become catastrophe. Miller looked from Evelyn to Brooks and finally understood why her calm had felt so powerful. She had not been trying to prove she was harmless. She had been trying to keep two armed officers from making a decision they could never undo. The first ambulance appeared at the far end of the bridge, its lights cutting through the storm. Brooks stood and began repeating the version he wanted the arriving officers to believe. Miller remained beside Evelyn, holding the identification card in one hand and the truth in the other. Then Evelyn looked directly at him. Do not let fear write your statement, she said. Miller closed his fingers around the card. Behind him, Brooks called his name with a warning in his voice. This time, Miller did not turn around. The ambulance doors opened beneath the bridge lights, and the rain seemed to soften without truly stopping. Paramedics moved around Evelyn with practiced calm, asking her name, the date, and whether she could hear them clearly. She answered each question with the same measured control she had used beside the car. Miller stayed near her until one of the medics asked him to step back. Only then did he realize he was still holding her military identification card. Water had gathered along its edge, but the printed rank remained clear beneath the flashing lights. Colonel Evelyn Carter. He looked toward Brooks, who stood several yards away speaking rapidly to a supervisor who had just arrived. His hands moved as he talked, shaping the story before anyone else could. Evelyn had reached suddenly. Evelyn had refused commands. Evelyn had created the danger. Miller listened, and each sentence felt farther from what he had witnessed. A medic placed a warm blanket over Evelyn and prepared to move her toward the ambulance. Before they lifted the stretcher, she turned her head and found Miller in the rain. His face looked younger now, stripped of the certainty the uniform had given him at the start of the stop. He stepped closer and returned the identification card. Evelyn closed her fingers around it, then paused. Keep it for the report, she said. Document where you found it. Miller nodded, but she continued watching him. He understood that she was not reminding him of procedure. She was giving him a choice. Behind them, Brooks called his name. Miller did not answer. The bridge had become strangely quiet despite the radios, engines, and distant traffic. Rainwater slid along the side of Evelyn's sedan and gathered beneath the rear door. Through the window, the garment bag still hung untouched, dark blue fabric visible through the clear cover. The silver eagles caught a passing flash of light and disappeared again. Miller stared at them, then at the wooden box on the back seat. Everything about the car now contradicted the assumptions that had guided the stop. Yet he knew the truth should not have depended on what she carried, what she wore, or who would answer when her name was called. A woman had followed instructions. A camera had recorded it. That should have been enough. Evelyn watched the rain collect on the metal rail of the bridge. For a moment, the pain, the lights, and the voices faded behind an older memory. She saw a desert sky before dawn and a line of exhausted soldiers waiting for her order. One young lieutenant had once admitted that he was afraid to contradict a senior commander, even when the map in front of them was clearly wrong. Evelyn had told him that courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was refusing to let fear choose for you. Now Miller stood where that lieutenant once had, trapped between rank and conscience. Evelyn lifted her eyes to him. You still have time to become the men you thought you were, she said softly. Miller's throat tightened. Brooks called again, sharper this time. Miller glanced over his shoulder. His training officer was waiting beside the patrol car, one hand resting near the body camera controls. The meaning was clear. Come here. Agree. Protect the version already being built. Miller looked back at Evelyn. Her voice was quieter now, but it carried more authority than Brooks's command. Tell the truth, Officer Miller. The words did not accuse him. That made them harder to escape. The paramedics moved the stretcher toward the ambulance, and the doors opened. With a low mechanical sound. Evelyn disappeared into the warm interior light, leaving Miller alone in the cold rain with her identification card and the knowledge that silence was no longer neutral. He reached for his own body camera, checked the red recording light, and then turned toward the arriving supervisor. Before Brooks could speak for him, Miller took one steady breath and said, "I need to make a separate statement." By the time the ambulance reached Riverside Medical Center, the rain had thinned to a silver mist against the emergency entrance. Evelyn was moved through bright hallways under a ceiling of white panels that passed above her one by one, steady as a metronome. Nurses asked questions. A physician checked her condition. Someone removed her wet coat and placed it in a clear plastic bag. Through it all, Evelyn remained conscious, answering with the calm precision of a person trained to think while others panicked. At 2:17 in the morning, a hospital administrator entered the room and asked whether there was anyone they should contact. Evelyn gave him two names. Brigadier General Thomas Reed. Marcus Carter. Less than 40 minutes later, the atmosphere outside her room changed. Military police arrived first, followed by General Reed in a dark overcoat, his face controlled but pale with anger. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. When he asked where the body camera recordings were being secured, every person in the hallway understood that the question was not optional. Across town, Miller sat alone in an interview room at the county station. His wet uniform clung coldly to his shoulders, and a paper cup of coffee had gone untouched beside him. Captain Laura Bennett sat across the table with a recorder between them. Brooks had already given his account. According to him, Evelyn had acted unpredictably and reached into her coat despite repeated warnings. Miller stared at the small red light on the recorder and heard Evelyn's words again. "Do not let fear write your statement." He described the stop from the beginning. He explained the damaged plate light, the visible hands, the conflicting commands, and the wallet that appeared exactly where. Evelyn said it would. Captain Bennett asked whether Brooks had instructed him to support a particular version. Miller hesitated only once. Then he told her the truth. Bennett stopped taking notes. She asked him to repeat the sentence word for word. "We need to get the report straight before everyone arrives." Miller did. By sunrise, Brooks's camera footage had been copied, sealed, and reviewed by investigators. The video left little room for interpretation. Evelyn's movements were slow. Her hands were visible. Her voice remained calm. The command changed more than once. Then came the detail no one expected. General Reed recognized Brooks before the hospital staff finished playing the recording. He had seen that face in an older file. 3 years earlier, Brooks had attended a joint training program led by Evelyn on decision-making under pressure. An archived video was retrieved from the county training center. In it, Evelyn stood at the front of a classroom wearing her army uniform, silver eagles fixed to her shoulders. Brooks sat in the back row. The room listened as she spoke about how assumptions could become dangerous when authority refused correction. "When fear becomes certainty without evidence, innocent people pay the price," she said on the recording. Brooks had heard those exact words. He had even challenged them. At 8:05 that morning, Captain Bennett played the old training video beside the body camera footage in the station conference room. The contrast was impossible to ignore. On one screen, Evelyn warned him what unchecked certainty could do. On the other, he demonstrated it. Brooks watched in silence, his face emptied of every defense he had carried through the night. He had not failed to recognize a colonel. He had failed to recognize the lesson she had already placed in front of him. At the hospital, Marcus arrived wearing the uniform he had prepared for his oath ceremony. He entered Evelyn's room with his shoulders squared, but his eyes gave away the fear he had carried from the moment the call came. Evelyn reached for his hand. "I am sorry I missed it," she said. Marcus shook his head. "They postponed the ceremony. Everyone is waiting for you." General Reed stood near the window, holding a tablet with the two videos paused side by side. Evelyn looked at the image of Brooks in the classroom, then at the image from the bridge. She did not smile. She did not speak in anger. She only said, "He remembered the uniform. He forgot the human being inside it." Outside her room, investigators placed Brooks on administrative leave and prepared formal charges. Inside, morning light spread across the floor, touching Marcus's polished shoes and the plastic bag containing Evelyn's rain-soaked coat. For the first time since the stop began, the truth was no longer asking permission to be heard. 2 days later, Daniel Brooks stood outside Evelyn's hospital room without his badge, his rain-darkened hat turning slowly in his hands. Captain Laura Bennett waited several feet away, not as an escort, but as a witness. Brooks had asked for 5 minutes. Evelyn had agreed to 3. When he entered, Marcus remained near the window, arms folded across his uniform. General Reed stood beside the door, silent and unmoving. Brooks looked smaller without the equipment that had once made him seem untouchable. His voice was low. "Colonel Carter, I came to apologize." Evelyn studied him from the bed. Morning light rested across the blanket, warming the room in narrow bands. Her left hand lay still beside a folder of official reports. On top was Miller's statement, signed before sunrise. Brooks continued. "I made a terrible mistake. I was under pressure. The weather was bad. The stop happened quickly." Evelyn lifted one finger, and he stopped. "Do not use the weather to carry your responsibility," she said. Rain did not give the commands. Rain did not ignore the answers. Brooks lowered his eyes. "I know." "Do you?" Evelyn asked. "Or do you know who I am now?" The question settled over the room. Brooks glanced toward the Silver Eagle insignia resting on the table beside her folded uniform. His silence answered before he could. Evelyn leaned back against the pillow. "You did not owe me dignity because of my rank. You owed it to me before you knew my name." Brooks swallowed. "I cannot change what happened." "No," she said. "But you can stop asking me to make it easier for you." He looked toward Captain Bennett, then back at Evelyn. "I was told your statement could affect the charges." Marcus shifted near the window, but Evelyn remained calm. "Forgiveness is personal," she said. "Accountability is public. I will not confuse the two so you can feel relieved." Brooks's face tightened, not with anger, but with the weight of finally hearing something he could not command away. He admitted that after the ambulance arrived, he had asked Miller to match his report. Captain Bennett said nothing, but her eyes sharpened. Evelyn opened the folder and slid a page toward the edge of the table. Miller had already documented the conversation. Brooks stared at the paper. His shoulders dropped. There was no version left for him to protect. That afternoon, Officer Miller entered the room alone. His badge remained on his uniform, but he carried it differently now, as though he understood its weight for the first time. He stood at the foot of Evelyn's bed and told her that he had turned over both recordings, his notes, and every message Brooks had sent after the stop. He also admitted his own failure. "I saw the contradiction before anything happened," he said. "I knew the command was wrong, and I stayed quiet." Evelyn watched him carefully. Miller did not ask to be praised. He did not call himself brave. He simply waited for the truth to cost him something. Captain Bennett had informed him that he would face an internal review for failing to intervene sooner. Evelyn nodded once. "That is fair," she said. Miller accepted it. Before he left, he placed her military identification card on the table. The plastic had dried, but a faint watermark remained across one corner. Evelyn picked it up and turned it between her fingers. Miller looked at the card, then at her. "I am sorry it took seeing that rank for me to understand who was standing in front of us." Evelyn shook her head. "The lesson is not that you should recognize rank faster. The lesson is that you should recognize humanity first." Miller stood straighter, not from habit, but from understanding. Outside the room, reporters filled the hospital entrance, waiting for anger, revenge, or a sentence sharp enough to become a headline. Evelyn gave them none of those things. She released a written statement calling for independent review, revised traffic stop training, and a policy requiring officers to intervene when commands conflict or escalate without cause. Brooks was formally suspended, then charged after investigators completed their review. Miller remained under investigation, but his testimony prevented the case from being buried beneath procedure. That evening, Evelyn sat beside the window while Marcus adjusted the compass inside its wooden box. She had planned to give it to him after his ceremony. Instead, she placed it in his hands there. "A good leader makes sure no one is left behind," she said. Marcus looked toward the hallway where Miller had disappeared. "Even when they failed first." Evelyn watched the last light fade over the city. Especially then, she answered. Justice was not the destruction of every person who had been wrong. It was the refusal to let wrong remain protected. 3 months later, Evelyn Carter entered the assembly hall with a cane in her right hand and the same steady posture she had carried through every command of her career. The morning sun poured through tall windows, warming the polished floor and catching the silver eagles on her shoulders. Conversations faded as she moved down the center aisle. Soldiers, families, and instructors rose one by one, not because anyone ordered them to, but because respect had finally arrived before explanation. At the front of the hall, Marcus stood with the other candidates in a newly pressed uniform. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, yet when he saw his mother, the practiced calm left his face. Evelyn had missed the original ceremony, but she had refused to let the bridge take this one from them. General Reed offered her a seat near the front. She shook her head and remained standing. The oath began. Marcus raised his right hand and repeated each word clearly, promising to defend the Constitution and faithfully perform his duties. Evelyn listened without blinking. She heard the voice of the boy who once feared thunderstorms, the teenager who questioned whether service still meant anything, and the young man now choosing responsibility with open eyes. When the final words were spoken, Marcus looked directly at her. He did not run forward. He did not break formation. Instead, he lifted his hand in a formal salute. Evelyn stopped in the center aisle, balanced the cane against her leg, and returned it. For several seconds, no one applauded. The silence was too full for noise. It held the promise she had kept, the truth Miller had chosen, and the cost of a mistake that could no longer be hidden behind authority. Then the room rose in a wave of applause that seemed to reach every corner of the building. Weeks earlier, Daniel Brooks had entered a guilty plea to charges connected to the stop and the attempt to influence Miller's statement. His badge was permanently revoked, and the department agreed to an independent review of past complaints. Evelyn did not celebrate his fall. She testified that punishment without reform would only create another headline and leave the same danger waiting for someone else. Captain Laura Bennett adopted a new policy requiring officers to intervene when commands became contradictory or needlessly escalated. Traffic stop training now included the complete body camera recording, followed by Evelyn's older classroom lesson. New recruits watched both videos side by side. They saw how quickly assumptions could replace evidence, and how silence could protect a harmful decision. Miller accepted a suspension for failing to speak sooner. When he returned, he requested reassignment to the training division. He never presented himself as a hero. On his first day before a room of recruits, he placed his badge on the table and told them that authority did not erase fear. It made controlling fear more important. After the ceremony, Marcus met Evelyn beneath an oak tree outside the hall. The air carried the clean scent of cut grass, and flags moved gently above the courtyard. Evelyn opened the wooden box and handed him his grandfather's brass compass. Its surface was worn smooth by decades of use. Marcus held it carefully. "Which direction should I follow?" he asked. Evelyn looked toward the building where young officers and soldiers were beginning their careers. "The compass can tell you where north is," she said. "It cannot tell you what is right. For that, you have to pay attention to the people power teaches you to overlook." Marcus closed the box and embraced her gently. Nearby, Miller stood at a respectful distance. Evelyn noticed him, and their eyes met. He gave a small nod. She returned it. There was no easy forgiveness between them, but there was something honest beginning where silence had once stood. Evelyn had learned that kindness did not require her to forget, and justice did not require her to hate. Real strength was holding both truth and mercy without surrendering either one. As she walked toward the waiting car, the cane touched the pavement in a slow, steady rhythm. Sunlight crossed the faint mark above her collar and rested on the rank she had earned. Yet the people watching no longer stood because she was a colonel. They stood because they understood that dignity should never depend on a title. And as the courtyard grew quiet behind her, one question remained for everyone who had followed her story: when the person beside you chooses fear over truth, will you stay silent, or will you find the courage to speak?